And in use of lamentation he bewailed the backwardness of these lands, and particularly of this nation, to this duty, in that now after 60 years and upwards of great defections from and grievous breaches of our covenant by people of all ranks, yet there appears so little sense either of the obligation or breaches of them, and of a disposition to reviving and renewing of them, even amongst these, who not only profess some love to the reformation of religion, but even some belief of their perpetually binding obligation, and that notwithstanding, as the prophet Isaiah saith concerning Judah, in Isaiah 24 verse 5, quote, "The earth," or the land, "is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the obedience, broken the everlasting covenant," unquote. Our land having been defiled with popery and prelacy, and with a flood of abomination and profanity, the natural consequent of perfidy. The ordinances having been changed, perverted, and corrupted, and the covenant not only broken, but burnt ignominiously, and the adherents to it made criminal. Yet, for all this, there has not been a time found for renewing them these 23 years, and that ministers, at whose door it chiefly lay to stir up the land to this work, have many of them been as careless as others, waving and putting off a stumbled and offended people, expressing some concernedness for this duty, with these and the like pretexts, that it was not a fit time, nor the land in a case for it, too sad a truth, but not laboring to get the land brought to be in a case and disposition for it, by pressing the obligation, and plainly discovering the violations thereof, so that instead of being brought to a fitter condition of this duty, the covenants are almost forgotten and quite out of mind, so that the succeeding generation is scarce like to know that ever there was a covenant sworn in Scotland. And more particularly, that the godly who are dissatisfied with and dissent from the defections and corruptions of the times have discovered so little concern with the work of reformation and cause of God, which the covenants oblige us to own, defend, and promote. All which laxness and remissness for a lamentation and ought to be lamented and mourned over by the people of God. In the exhortation he pressed upon us who are embodied together in societies, and who then come together to renew our covenant engagements, by giving an open and public testimony of our adherence to the covenants, national and solemn league, that we should unite to attain a suitable frame and serious consideration of the weightiness, solemnness, and awfulness of the work we were then undertaking, enforcing the same by several cogent motives, as namely, because in renewing these covenants we are called to remember our baptismal and personal vows, whereby we had renounced the devil, the world, and the flesh, and devoted ourselves to the Lord to be his people, which if they were slighted and forgotten, there could be no right, acceptable and comfortable entering into national covenants. And likewise, because of the weightiness and the duties engaged to in our national covenant and in the solemn league and covenant, which he proved to be a covenant that ought to be renewed by us in this nation, no less than our national covenant. In regard it was a religious, just, and holy covenant made betwixt God and the three kingdoms, though it cannot now be taken in the same consideration and extent as at the first framing it was, that is, as a league betwixt us and the representative body of the kingdoms of England and Ireland, where he took occasion to go over the several articles of the covenant, showing the nature and weightiness of the duties. Besides these two more general doctrines, which were chiefly instituted upon, he observed several other pertinently deducible from the words, as first, that unfaithful dealing in God's covenant will breed distance and estrangement from God, which is implied in the children of Israel and Judah seeking the Lord, asking the way to Zion, etc. Their asking the way to Zion, importing that he had forgot the right way of worshiping God, and that their sins had made a sad separation between them and their God. Secondly, that it is necessary that persons become sensible of their sin against God and of his anger against them, and lay these things to heart, that they may be concerned about reconciliation with God and reform their lives. Thirdly, that the kindly exercise of repentance in a backsliding people lamenting after the Lord, and setting about to renew their covenant with him, hath an effectual influence to unite and cement the divided people of God. Thus in the text, the children of Israel and Judah, whom their iniquities had long and sadly divided, are uniting together in this desirable frame of weeping and seeking the Lord their God, and making a perpetual covenant with him. This doctrine he proved and applied briefly as the time would permit, both because of its native resultancy from the text, and because of his own and our sincere desire to see a holy union and communion in the way of truth and duty effected by returning to the Lord and renewing the covenant with him, as among all the godly, so especially among those that profess their dissent from and dislike of the corrupt courses of the times. Sermon being ended, after prayer, the covenants were first read according to the directory for renewing the Solemn League and Covenant prescribed by the Act of the General Assembly at Edinburgh, the 6th of October in 1648, post meridiem, entitled Act for Renewing of the Solemn League and Covenant, and thereafter the following Acknowledgement of Sins was also read, after which prayer was made, containing a comprehensive confession of the more general heads of the foresaid Acknowledgement of Sins, and a part of the 78th Psalm, beginning at the 36th verse, was sung, and the minister dismissed the congregation with a short reprehension and advice, reproving them for their unconcerned carriage and behavior during the reading of the acknowledgement of the breaches of these covenants, which had been first entered into, at the expense of so much blood and treasure, and confirmed and sealed with the blood of many honorable martyrs of all ranks in the land, withal exhorting all present to labor after a heart-melting frame for the right performance of the work in hand. Upon Thursday, July 24th, after singing a part of the 105th Psalm, from the 6th to the 12th verse, and prayer, Mr. John Macmillan preached upon Isaiah 44, verse 5, quote, "One shall say, I am the Lord's, and another shall call himself by the name of Jacob, and another shall subscribe with his hand unto the Lord, and surname himself by the name of Israel," unquote. Whereupon, after the unfolding of the context and explication of the words, showing that they clearly contain an intimation of a covenant relation betwixt God and a people, and their avouching of the same upon their part, the words seeming to have a reference to the state of the New Testament Church and conversion of the Gentiles, who, being allured by the great gospel blessings and mercies bestowed by God upon the Jews to join themselves to the Church, should avouch their interest in the Messiah and covenant of grace by taking the Lord for their God, and owning themselves to be his people, so that the words may be taken up as an answer to such a presupposed question as this, Whose are you, and what is your name? To which question one shall answer, I am the Lord's. Another, I am one of old, Jacob's family and offspring. Another, if you desiderate my name, look the covenant subscriptions, and you will find it there. Another will say, whatever my name was before, my surname now is an Israelite. So sweetly should a shower of gospel grace engage their hearts of the New Testament converts to avow their covenant relation to the Lord, and glory in their union with his church and covenanted people, having taken up a sense of the words to this effect. He deduced from them these two observations. Firstly, that the Lord is graciously pleased sometimes to privilege his people with very remarkable tokens of his gracious presence. This doctrine is clear from the context, verses 3 and 4. Quote, For I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thine offspring. And they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the watercourses. Unquote. Under this head of doctrine he gave the following marks to evidence whether the present time of renewing our covenant with God were indeed to us a time of the Lord's privileging us with his gracious presence. First, that a time of God's privileging his people with his gracious presence and a shower of gospel grace is a very inviting and alluring time, wherein, as the Lord invites his people to their duty by engaging their hearts and souls through his Spirit's gracious influences, to fall in love with him and his commandments, so they mutually invite one another to covenant with God. Secondly, that such a time proves a soul-engaging and taking time, wherein souls are engaged to fall in love with the covenant and with Christ the mediator of the covenant, and are taken in the net of the gospel. Thirdly, that a time of the letting out of God's gracious preference is ordinarily a time of many sweet and excellent resolutions, the people of God resolving to walk more accurately and circumspectly in the ways of new ordinances. Fourthly, that this usually is a time of ridding marches and clearing of evidences. Fifthly, that it is a time of many and special confirmations of God's love to the soul. Sixthly, that this time of God's letting out much of his gracious presence to his people is a very uniting and healing time to them amongst themselves, having given these marks to show whether the Lord were, at the occasion, letting out his gracious presence. He added by way of caution that, seeing, no doubt, the people of God would be expecting something of all these upon the undertaking of so great a work, if so be that they found it not, they should not thence be induced to have hard thoughts of the Lord, and to conclude that he keeps not his usual method with his people, or it is so good to them as formerly he hath been. For whatever defects there are upon his people's part, there is none upon the Lord's, for he remains the same to them, providing they do so to him. The change of his dispensations towards his people being from the change of his people's deportment towards him. The second doctrine, resulting more directly from the words, was that the Lord's Spirit poured out in plenty upon his people will quickly bring them to an embracing of him, and to a public acknowledgement and avouching of the same. Thus it was with the people of God in the text. No sooner does the Lord, quote, pour water upon the thirsty and floods upon the dry ground, unquote, even his Spirit upon the spiritual seed of Israel. But presently they are at covenanted work and subscribing work, quote, one shall say, I am the Lord's, etc., unquote. In prosecuting this doctrine, he showed first negatively that he was not for that occasion largely to treat of the several ways that the Spirit useth to manage his work of engaging the hearts of his people to embrace Christ, and so to make a public avouchment of the same, whether he doth it, by representing to their view the sweet and precious promises made in the covenant of grace, thereby sweetly alluring and drawing them with the cords of love to himself, or by holding forth to their consciences the terrors and threatenings of the law, and thereby powerfully constraining them to fly to him as the city of refuge from the face of divine justice pursuing them. For seeing the Spirit is a free agent, and blows both how and where he listeth, he may engage a soul to close with Christ by either of these ways, though most usually he doeth it by a conjunction and concurrence of both. Only this ought to satisfy us, that what way soever the Spirit taketh in the bringing a soul to embrace Christ upon the gospel terms, he so manageth the work as that the end is effectually and infallibly attained. Neither, secondly, was he to inquire into the measure of the outpouring of the Spirit's graces and operations, which is effectual for attaining the end, this being one of the deep things of God which the Spirit alone searcheth, and therefore is not necessary for us further to know, save only that we understand so much to be needful, as many serve to empty the creature of all confidence in, or dependence upon itself, or any other creature helps whatsoever, and bring it to rely upon Christ alone for acceptance with God, so much is necessary, and less cannot be sufficient. Nor, thirdly, was he to handle the material differences between those who are brought really and sincerely to accept, embrace, and acknowledge the Lord for their Lord, and to avouch the same publicly, which presupposeth the mighty power of the Spirit manifested in the sweet impressions which he maketh upon the soul, moving them sweetly and readily to comply with, and yield to Christ without any longer resistance. And these, who only in semblance and show profess to avouch Christ to be their Lord, and feign submission to him, not from the Spirit's effectual and saving operations, but either from carnal and external considerations, or at most from the Spirit's common motions and convictions, which differences commonly arise from the different natures, motives, manners, or ends of this, their acknowledging and avouching Christ for their Lord, and covenanting with him. These things, as not so immediately proper to the work in hand, though natively involved in the doctrine, being only cleared in transition, he came in the second place more positively to insist upon and handle the following heads. First, more generally to propose some considerations which make such a great work as renewing covenant with God a weighty, hard, and difficult work, and upon the other hand, to lay down some counterbalancing considerations which render such a work more easy and light, and may afford matter of encouragement towards the undertaking of it. Secondly, more particularly in application to ourselves and the work in hand, to lay before those who were resolved to enter into covenant with God, what were the things that seemed to speak against us in that work, and might prove matter of discouragement in the undertaking of it, and what upon the other side might seem to speak for us, and be ground of encouragement to us to go forward in humble and sincere endeavors to renew our covenant with the Lord, together thirdly with some advices and directions to such as were resolved unto the work. As for the first, the considerations which make covenanting work weighty and difficult, the first consideration was drawn from the greatness of the party to be covenanted with, the great and glorious Jehovah, the Creator of the ends of the earth, who is a holy and jealous God, and who will not forgive the iniquity of such as are false-hearted and perfidious in his covenant, obstinately persisting in their false dealings. So Joshua premonished a people, making very fair resolutions and promises to serve the Lord, that it was a harder work than at first sight they apprehended, quote, that they could not serve the Lord. In regard, he is an holy God, he is a jealous God, and would not forgive their transgressions nor their sins, and that if they should forsake the Lord and serve strange gods, then he would turn and do them hurt and consume them, after he had done them good, unquote. Joshua 24, verses 19 and 20. 'Tis a part of his name, Exodus 34:7, that he will by no means clear the obstinately and impenitently guilty.